Okay, welcome to the presentation of Hidden People, the Worker Stories report from the IWW Iceland. So we wrote this report last year, and for the report we collected more than 50 stories. The stories were from things that happened between 2017 and 2020. And in our report we used the direct voices of workers. We did not edit the quotes. We also did not do any judgment on the workers, and we did no fact checking. If the workers told us something happened, then we just believed them that it happened. The report was anonymized, which means that the workplaces were anonymized and the personal information from the workers, so they cannot be identified. So also it cannot be identified, for example, where they worked, in which part of the country, because a lot of times that's how you can find out who the worker is. Iceland is small. And there are 4 issues that we found. The first one was contract issues, the second issues during volunteering, the third and the biggest wage theft, and the fourth abuse and harassment. And all testimonies had at least one of them. All of them actually had wage theft, but a lot of them also had several, and the issues are very much interconnected. There were red flags that workers were telling us about, like the first time they noticed that something might be off about the workplace. The first was warning from other workers, Facebook groups, word of mouth, also a high staff turnover, not having a contract, only having a verbal contract, having a different pay, hours, or task than agreed on, especially if you didn't have a written down contract, and repeated mistakes or miscalculations on pay slips, if there was a pay slip. Our biggest issue was wage theft. So wage theft can be all kind of things. It doesn't only mean that you do not get paid. Wage theft also can be you get paid the wrong hours, evening, week, night, holiday rate is not counted, not paying for sick days, not paying holidays, not paying into the pension funds, not paying taxes, and also a delay in payment, that the worker has to wait 1 or 2 weeks or several months for the pay. Then there's also changing hours without notice. So if for example, changing the hours from 100% hours down to 40% hours without notice, which is actually not legal in Iceland. And one thing that is very much interconnected with wage theft is the apparent incompetence. The idea that the business is struggling or that management is very confused, which is often used to make the worker be more understanding of the situation, like, yeah, we're struggling, you'll get your pay in 2 weeks. But these mistakes and this chaos never happens in favor of the worker. It usually always just means that the worker is getting less wages. There is a huge emotional and economic toll of wage theft, especially for foreign workers who often do not have the social network to help them in an economic difficult situation. And a lot of times they are very nervous about becoming homeless, about even paying for necessities of life. And because they do not have the social network, a lot of their social life is at work. And therefore losing the job can also mean losing the only social network you have. Once workers noticed there was wage theft going on and they complained to the bosses or to the union, they were often met with abuse, harassment, bullying in the workplace in retribution. A lot of times it was made very clear to them that they are disposable, that they can just get fired and a new person can be rehired. They were often, with the threat of being fired, asked to do tasks that were not in the contract. And a lot of times tasks were only asked from certain workers. One of the quotes was, for example, that the Polish workers were always asked to clean because Polish people are good in cleaning. The work schedule was often way more unreliable, especially for foreign workers. A lot of times Icelanders were full-time employed, while, for example, foreign workers are always just employed for half a year, and then another half a year, and then another half a year. There is also, especially in restaurants, a habit of watching people on CCTV cameras, which is actually against Icelandic privacy laws. And then, of course, there is the very classical abuse of yelling, shouting, mobbing, negative comments about your culture, that a lot of workers experience both from their employers but also from clients. When a worker decided to leave, especially because of abuse and harassment, a lot of times wages were withheld in order to force them to stay longer than the notice period, especially when the employer had problems finding new employers because he was known to be a bad employer. We did get some reports of sexual harassment, but no one who experienced this wanted to be named in our written report. And this is, I think, a topic that needs a lot more time and a lot more care than we could do in this report. So the harassment and bullying was often as retribution, even for asking for very small things, such as asking for a contract or asking to be paid correctly, refusing a task that's not in the contract, and especially going to the union. Going to the union was treated like an aggressive act by the workers. And in the end, the most common practice for workers who go to the union is terminating them. Basically, the union gives a call to the employer calls the employee to the office the next day and says, you went to the union, you're fired. And so why is it like it? So first of all, certain employers are preying on precarious workers. They rather employ foreigners because foreigners are easier to exploit, especially in the countryside, where they actually try and get workers from abroad to come directly to Iceland, relying on the fact that they do not know how the system works. In the countryside, there's also the aggravating factor that a lot of times the employer is also the landlord, which means that they can put even more pressure on the worker by also threatening homelessness. And making the threat real. I mean, this is a very common practice, that the employee is kicked out of their housing the same day. There is a lack of legal consequences for employers. So basically, if you commit wage theft as an employer, the only thing the union can ask for is the wages that are already owed. There is no fine, which obviously insensitizes wage theft, because if the worst can happen is that you have to give what you stole back, you're more likely to steal. The other factor is at-will employment. So in Icelandic law, on the private market, anyone can be fired for no reason, which means that threatening firing as retribution for going to the union is a real threat. And it is used that way as well. The other thing where at-will employment is used, that if there are economic difficult times, and we saw that very much during COVID, Icelandic employers who have to hire their friends or family who maybe lost a job somewhere else happily fire all the foreign workers in order to hire their friends and family. And because at will employment is the law of the land, there is little the worker can do. And there's also little the unions do in that case. Workers have gone to the unions with that, and the unions say, well, this firing is legal, but there's nothing we can do. Which brings me to the next point, the weak reactions from unions. So when you have a wage theft case, because the unions can only ask by law for the amount back that is owed, they encourage the worker to settle. Because it's so common wage theft, they are also overrun with cases. So they encourage the workers to settle. Therefore, it's very useful for the employers to commit wage theft. Therefore, the more cases go to the union, and it's kind of like this vicious circle that's going on. Unions also focus on individual cases, which basically means they, in some workplaces, they really play whack-a-mole. They have one case coming up from the workplace, go through this case, it maybe takes half a year, and then the next worker comes from the same workplace, and then the next, and the workers get fired, and then new workers get hired, and like more like the same workplace like basically keeps the union occupied forever. And the unions, for whatever reason, do not go to workplaces and actually try and organize these workers on the workplaces. And then there is the Icelandic factors, especially in the countryside. There is an Icelandic culture of social peace. You do not break the social peace. And especially in the countryside, unions are very unwilling to fight for foreign workers, because why would you break the social peace with your neighbor, your friend, your family, for some person who is not really part of society and is going to leave anyway? Okay, I will not go over the organizing advice because we do not have a lot of times. They're just here. But what we do need is, because the unions only look at individual cases, they do not organize workplaces, which is done by unions in other countries, like not radical unions, normal unions. And I have a lot of theories why it's not done in Iceland. Part of it is the social peace. We have to start organizing ourselves. You're less likely to get fired if you go as your whole workplace. Because this is something like one worker is replaceable, all the workers not. Especially in a tourist business where you need to keep it going. And we have had positive experience with organizing a whole workplace. Even in the tourist business, even with workers who are only there for very temporary. So what is next for us? What is next? What are we going to do with this report? We want to present the report to target institutions, but we also want to be heard. And in order to be heard, it cannot just be our little organization coming, presenting this report, and then getting a tap on your head, oh, this is well done of you. We have to work with other organizations, immigrant organizations, and we have to start making demands to these institutions. And this is what we're here for. We're here to make a list of demands of unions and of governmental organizations, demands that we can then present together with the report, so that we are not shouting into the void. We are still working on trying to create an online blacklist, mainly as information for foreign workers, but it is difficult to do without getting sued in Icelandic libel law, and therefore this is a future project that we're working on. Okay, this is it. Thank you all for listening. The recording will stop now. So during the discussion, like, you're not being recorded, you can talk freely.